Okay, coaches, you're all very welcome. It's throw-in time, as the player or the referee would say. So you're all very welcome. This is our third Ulster J webinar on the club coach development program, and this webinar tonight is titled Mental Toughness in association with Untitled Sportswear. The webinar, just to make you aware, the webinar is being recorded and it will be accessible on the Ulster J YouTube in a few days. The chat box is available for all you to put in any comments or questions during the presentation. It's great, coaches. We're all back out on the field there on Monday past, so we have a massive crowd. There was over 300 coaches registered for this webinar tonight. So as I say, you're all very welcome. I just want to make you aware of the next webinar, which is next Wednesday night. We're doing a set of 9 for this block. And next week's webinar is called Setting Up a Nursery Program. So you can register, maybe you have already registered for that one. You can register on Ulster J Facebook or Twitter, and as I say, that one will be mainly for coaches working with maybe on the 9 and below that very young age level, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds or whatever. So if you know coaches within your club that are working that age level, encourage them to register for next week's session, which will be delivered by Terence McWilliams and Gareth Thornton. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over now our two presenters tonight. The two men does not need any introduction. They're Frank Dawson and Brenton Harpur. I'm sure a lot of you will know the men. Frank is a St. Gall's man in County Antrim. Brenton Harpur, Drumquon Wolftones man, County Tyrone. The both of them has had great success at coaching and managing teams, a number of teams at club and county level. And I'm not going to go through it all with you during the presentation. The two men will be touching on work and areas they've done in coaching. As I said, I'm delighted we have the two men here tonight, and hopefully you will really enjoy the presentation. So I'll hand you over now to start off our session tonight to Frank Dawson.
Thanks, Tony. Just welcome everybody to the presentation tonight on particularly the area of mental toughness in Gaelic games. And just from the outset, could I just set the scene that both myself and Brian, we're not coming to this from a professional background in terms of mental well-being and mental awareness. Our presentation is very much coming from each of us has over 30 years coaching experience within the GAA, having coached teams at all levels. So what we want to do is to draw on our experiences over that time. We're all very much aware in terms of how we physically prepare teams, tactically prepare teams, and the challenge we all have is mentally, how do our teams come together? So that's where we're going to draw our experiences from. I know that there has been quite a number of questions already submitted. We hope that we will cover most of those questions during the course of the presentation. If we don't, or if we haven't answered it satisfactorily, which is always the case, please feel free to ask maybe at the end or during the course of the presentation, but hopefully we'll be able to cover most of those questions. We want it to be interactive, we want to involve you, and we want to get your ideas and your views on what we're presenting. It doesn't mean you will sit and agree with everything we say, but we hope to stimulate some debate. And we hope two things. One, that you can relate some of the things we'll talk about to the teams and the players that you have coached or currently coaching. But more importantly, we hope that you enjoy the presentation as we go on. And I really just want to ease our way into the presentation about this area, because it's quite a tough area. And I actually had looked at three, over the course of the last couple of months, 3 different sports people. And I'll talk about them one second, but I was drawn to I listened to an interview last night. The ladies captain of Northern Ireland women's soccer team, who made the Euros for the first time ever last night. And the coach said last night, said we were always going to qualify because our management instilled an inner belief in us. And I thought, there's one for the presentation tonight. But I'm going to move on. And what I want to do is look at this fella here. Tom Brady, 43 this year. In the beginning of February, he won his seventh Super Bowl. 7 Super Bowls. But from a young age, he always wanted to be playing the NFL. From a young age, he had this quote on his bedroom wall. You can see it yourselves. If you want to compete with the big boys, you need to learn to play in the long grass. Just the top box. If you find the top box okay. What was this? What was this doing? What was this saying to him? What message was he looking from this quote to have it on his bedroom wall? Just a couple of words just in the top box. What do you think that he was looking for from this? Because we're involving ourselves with this, we're trying to get a better understanding of what we're looking at, what we mean by all of this.
There's a lot coming through now, Frank. Looking for a challenge.
Yeah.
Work for it from a young age. No point being comfortable. Challenge yourself.
Yeah.
He was looking for challenges to make him better. A lot coming through here, Frank. He wanted to be the best and become the best.
Yeah.
You have to play in the dirty pitches before you get to play on the good ones. He wanted to be the best. He meant that he needs to be tough and ready for adversity, ambition and belief. A lot of stuff coming through there, Frank.
Yeah, but it's weird because when they're talking about the long grass, and if you're in the long grass, you can't see what's coming at you. So what we've come across is exactly what he was thinking about. He was going to face unknown challenges, and he had to learn to face them down. But he also had those challenges were going to provide some new learning experiences. And from those experiences, he was going to have the ability to broaden his learning and his skills, but also his mentality in dealing with those. Now, I just want to develop, that's very good. I'm glad that contribution. Just develop it on. He's 18 and he's just finished in high school, so he has two choices of university to go and play ball. His first, one of his choices was the University of California, 30 miles from his house. He was going to be the first choice quarterback. He was going to be able to live at home and have all the home comforts and mommy looking after him. His other option was the University of Michigan, over 2,000 miles from his home. And he was going to be seventh choice quarterback. Seventh choice. He chose Michigan. Why would he have chosen Michigan? If he could win the top box.
To challenge himself here, outside his comfort zone, prove himself, work hard. He wanted to get away from mommy. Outside his comfort zone, take himself out of his comfort zone, a lot I'm saying.
Okay, that's great. And one of the number of things that I can through from that, if he was going to be seventh choice, he wasn't going to play all the time, so he had to become resilient. Because he was never, well, he may have thought I should be playing, he wasn't going to get game time. So it built up resilience in himself. It made him a committed team player to hang about. You know, there are players, if anything, some of our players who aren't getting game time, you know, decide this is not for me. So he had to be committed. It also gave him a very positive mindset. Because he had to grab every opportunity that presented it to him. And he also had to be, in his mind, very pragmatic, because he knew he wasn't going to play either full games or any games on a regular basis. So he had to be very pragmatic. So the case that I also said about him, it wasn't until his fourth year at Michigan that he became a starter quarterback. So the one key word out of Tom Brady that I take from what we've said we looked at is challenges. Just remember that word, challenges. Just remember that word as we go through the presentation. Let's look at this person. Will not be as long. Rory McIlroy. If you ever want to do a study in terms of mental toughness or mental weakness or whatever side of mentality, Rory McIlroy is fascinating. I watched him beginning of February and he played the Finnish Open. He was out of contention after the third round. He went out the last, so he had no chance of winning. He went out the last day and he hit 64, the best round of the day. How was he able to do that? Again, in the top box. How was Rory McIlroy, but no chance to win the competition? Competition done, it was out, has to play the last round. He could have just been through. He hit 64. How was he able to do that? Mentally, how was he able to do that?
No pressure. Most of us coming through here, no pressure. He had nothing to lose at that stage. And being his best, he was focused on being the best rather than the outcome. Again, a lot of the comments, Frank, is no pressure. So
okay, brilliant.
Finish strong. Stop him saying here, finish strong to enjoy it. He was not under any pressure, performing to his own standards, or did he challenge? Did he challenge himself, or did he challenge himself to finish strong? So things like that. Frank.
Yeah, I would agree with those. The pressure was awesome. He had a competitive mindset, so he was always going to do his best. He actually refocused, and you think about it, coming off, if you think, relate him to our players who make mistakes, he refocused and got on with the next process in front of him. And more importantly, probably no expectation on him. And to me, that were challenges with Tom Brady is a key word. But in Rory McIlroy, note the word expectation in terms of how that affects our mindset. The last one I want to quickly look at is Big Rock. And remember the 2017 All-Ireland final, I'm sure we all remember it. Teams level, doubling the free and injury time. He steps up and scores it. Again, mentally, picture it, 82,000 Croke Park, game tied, match winning score, if he gets it. Mentally, how was he able to do that? Put your thoughts in the top box.
Confidence in his own process, practice, relied on his process, stepping up in the moment, apply process, practice and confidence, focused, trained to keep.
Yeah, that's very good.
Again, not.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So what we had, he probably had visualized this, he had practiced it so often, his rehearsal technique for key moments of the game. He was confident because he had done it so often. His routine and his technique was really well rehearsed. And the one thing he would have been focused on that simple task. And that's the key word I take out of this, is focus was on where it should be. So now that we've sort of had a look at that, I'm going to pass over to Brendan. Thanks for your contribution so far. During the course of this and the presentation, just put your comments in the chat box. Pass over to Brendan.
Thanks, Frank. The question I want to pose to you here is, what mentally can prevent players performing to their best? We talked a little bit about it there, but really what we're talking about is interference mentally. So if we take a scenario where you've prepared your team for a championship final and you know their fitness levels have peaked as planned, everything's going spot on that way. They've demonstrated that they're a skillful group of players. The week before the training, they're performing as you'd expect in training. So everything is running right. However, what mentally could prevent them from performing to their best? What mental interference could come in? So if you just put in the chat box, what sort of things might come into their heads or distract them mentally? Okay. Yeah, trouble at home is one coming in there yet. I mean, it's very important, you know, how they've left home. Yep. Thoughts about it, or maybe concentrate too much on the outcomes. Yep. You know, attachment to the outcome. Yeah. Feeling you must win, not focusing on the performance. Their mother. Yes. We've heard cases of that already, but mothers interfering. Self-doubt. Yeah, you know, that's an important point you're making about self-doubt. That's something we need to talk about. There could be, yeah, concentrating on themselves, stressed. Good. So those are the sort of things that are going through their heads, this sort of pressure, and that can get to players. And so just to give you an example of this, sometimes when a player is before a game and the nerves and anxiety get to them, what happens is their heart rate shoots up. So if you think of this, if you had a player in the dressing room and you asked him to do running on the spot, high knees, say, for 20 minutes, you would be saying, when you'd be mad, because his heart rate would be up to at least 120, maybe 130, and he's burning energy. Well, if you put a heart monitor on a player who can't control their anxiety, you'll find that their heart rate is running about 120, maybe more. So they're actually burning energy and getting tense just sitting there because they're not able to control the feelings and emotions that's going on in their heads. So, and the other thing I want to mention to you as well, and this is something big players are aware of, you will feel nervous because the adrenaline is running, and they need to understand that's okay to feel anxious, but they know when they go out in the field and they touch the ball, everything will be fine. But there's one thing you should be aware of, and it happened to me personally, and actually I was the coach, and there was a championship semi-final, and my knees buckled from under me. But I knew what had happened. My nerves had got to me. I wasn't even thinking about it. I thought everything was planned. But what you do then is you do what is called centering. You take deep breaths and bend your knees and just let the tension out, and then you'll be fine. And I was fine. But if that happened to a player, he wouldn't be able to play. So they need to be aware if these sorts of things happen. There's a little tip for them. Okay, so see things that people worrying about how to block out surroundings, the crowds. Yeah, they start thinking about things other than matters to the game. All right, I'm going to move on and give you a little challenge now. So here's some tasks I want you to have a look at and see how would you correct them. So the first one, and you stick it on the text box there, please, is an inconsistent free taker. Your free taker, some days he's right, some day he gets it wrong. It doesn't seem to follow a pattern. So what do you think you could do to correct that? We talked there about Dean Rock. You may think of some things there like that. So what could you do if he's an inconsistent free taker? Yeah, practice, that's important, yeah. Mental, physical routine, yeah, following a pattern, a routine. Yeah, not a visual, yeah. Change the free taker. Yeah, sometimes it's not as easy that. We'll talk about that, why that happens. Entering, practice through gradual, yeah, in the match. Okay, good. Understanding what he's doing wrong. I'll come back to that in two. That's an interesting one. Let the keeper to a few, maybe, yes. Show him you trust him, yeah. Okay, all right, good, very good. Positive self-talk. Now I'll just give you my responses to them. Keep putting them in. I'll keep an eye on them out there. Build up his confidence. Get him to focus fully on the process. Right now, here's some of my views, and here's one is that sometimes we say when a player isn't consistent, that is confidence. So I want you to think that competence breeds confidence. When the player feels he's competent, then he'll feel more confident in doing what he's doing. So that's again about the perfect practice. He knows he's done it before. He knows there is routine, and so he's reassuring himself. But one of the problems he needs to think about is to practice on, not about getting it right, but practice until he can't get it wrong. That's the difference. A lot of them, that's what happens. They get it right a few times, but they don't know why it works, so they're not able to repeat it. So that's part of their problem. Losing focus, mental distractions. Of course, the pressure of the kick, the occasion, maybe they've missed one beforehand. And so sometimes when players make mistakes, they carry it in their heads. Now, I remember speaking to John Devine, the Tyrone goalkeeper, and I said to John, I says, what happens when the ball hits the back of the net? How do you cope with that as a keeper? And he says, I just catch a piece of grass and I throw it away. So he was using a technique for himself. You just throw away negativity. So if you start thinking about it, you're going to bring it back into every free kick you're going to do then, and every mistake will start to repeat itself. So players do use little things like that as a way of dismissing and getting rid of sort of mistakes. Now, The other thing is that there could be pressure for time. If the player feels rushed, or teammates even themselves can put pressure on. So one of the things I would say to you is when you're practicing, you should see an exact spot on the boot, and you should see it strike an exact spot on the ball. Now, the reason for that is, first of all, is making sure you make the proper contact. But it has another reason. Because your mind works so fast, all these distractions are going through your head, you tense up. So you have to give the brain something to do to switch it off. So here, say, look, what's this? So it means that you will free up and you're relaxed in your body because your mind is just focusing on this task of seeing your foot strike the ball. So it has both things, making sure it's accurate, but also cutting out the distractions. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. And the next one is a player who argues with a referee and teammates and is easily wound up. How would you cope with that player? He argues with the referees and teammates and he's easily wound up, and players would know that, the opposition would know to wind him up. So what could you do about that? Making the captain, yeah, just one, okay. And that could be risky sometimes, right? Okay, relaxation training to emotional control. Okay, make captain. I've seen that being done with captains, and I must say I haven't seen it working. They still, if they don't know how to control themselves, will become a problem anyway. I have a word with myself. Okay, all right. Okay, get them to change. Sub them and have a talk to them. Breathing techniques. Okay, good. Get them to discharge negativity. Yeah, and this is important when we look at all these things. We might see what is a problem, but we need to look at how do you help the player do something about it. So, yeah, tell them letting the team down. That's a very important one as well. Good. Put in situations in training. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, explain the impact. Good. So you're hitting all those buttons. Because what I would say to you would be, firstly, he needs to be aware that it's a problem. Because guys, just shout off. They think it's okay, but they don't understand the consequences for themselves or the team. You need to make the player aware that there's the consequences for himself. Say that, what's the consequence for yourself if you keep doing this? If the ball has been moved forward, or you turn the referee against us, or so those sorts of things. You have to say what's going to be the consequences for you, and then say what's the consequences for the rest of the players. So that's the first thing, get them to be aware of the consequences. But it does involve a one-to-one discussion. And so you need to get him to identify the triggers. It's not when I say just stop doing it. He needs to become aware of what causes the trigger. So it might be a referee's decision. It might be what these guys are sledging him and reacts to that. So we need to give him a few ideas of how he could respond to that. So things like, for example, if a guy's winding up, he can say, I know what you're doing. You're trying to wind me up here. So once he declares it, that just diffuses the other guy right away. So little things like that, just to call it out. Sometimes count to 10 and then, of course, count to 10 again. But what you need to ask them is, how are they going to cope with that when that happens? Because if they don't come up with a solution, then they just keep doing what they've been doing. Right. One of the things I would often say to players is this, that who argue with referees, a little tip to say to them, is if a referee makes a decision, your first thought should be, where's my man? That's your response. Where's my man? Now, move on to a player who doesn't keep to the game plan. So what would you say there? A player who doesn't keep to the game plan. Take him off. Okay. Does he understand it? Oh, often they don't. That's a good point. Often they don't understand it. And that's often it is about communications. That's a very good point. Right? Sub him, okay, take him off, re-emphasize overall game plan. Good. Yeah. So what I would say to you is, yeah, they don't follow because they're not fully clear. Absolutely. For players who seem to have difficulty following the plan, is to ask them before. So you say, the guys who don't stick to the game plan. So you say, right, Joe, just what's the game plan for today? What are we supposed to be doing? Then they know. That's the only way you know, if they can tell you. But it's a way of picking things out and trying to reinforce it. The other thing I would say also about game plans, a lot of managers and coaches do game plans verbally. A very inefficient way of doing it. Only 20% goes in if you just tell them. You need to write them up. Visual is 3 times more powerful. That's often why it goes wrong. Right, so the other thing in is also the reason guys break the game plan is because things don't go according to plan. And then they think they can do whatever they like. So what you've got to do is say, what happens when things go wrong? Go that through the players and say, if this happens, we can see the goal in the first 5 minutes, it goes, you know, or whatever. How do we react to that? So there's no surprises. So that means that they can go back to the game plan again. But if you don't talk that through, then they'll make it up themselves as they go along. All right, the other thing you might use is mottos. Sometimes teams agree little phrases, you know, they might say, like, for example, TFA, you know, might be turnover, full out attack. Little cues they can call to themselves to remind them what they're supposed to be doing. But that's something the players need to work out themselves, and a little code is a way of helping them through it. Now, the final question is a forward who doesn't track back when the ball is turned over. What will you do with him? He doesn't track back.
Just maybe a few comments and we can move on.
Okay. All right. I'll talk it through. I'll watch them as they come in as well.
Okay, Brandon.
So one thing again about this, all these things comes down to, it really comes down to one-to-one coaching discussion where you have to take the player aside and talk to them. Raise again the awareness and the consequences to the team of him not tracking back. But don't tell him. If you tell him, he's not thinking. You must ask him what are the consequences and try and give him hints. But let him discover for himself why it is an issue. Then it'll stick. So the other thing is get him to identify attention cues. That is, what triggers when I need to do something, when the ball is turned over? What are the sort of things that triggers me? I need to now track back. And how do I track back? It's not just drop it back anywhere. So that needs to be talked through with the player. And of course, you need to build it into training sessions. Okay, there's another one of a video analysis showing. Yeah, I mean, video is very powerful if you can get that and just show them what's going on. And often, again, just show them, let them see for themselves. All right, I'm handing over now to Frank.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Okay, so we've talked about different scenarios. So maybe we're going to try and start looking at some strategies. Ben mentioned some of those during his presentation, those number of slides. One of the things that we want to look at with individual players is in terms of getting them to identify areas that they're weak. And it's all about doing the hard thing first. It's easy to concentrate on what we're good at, but the weak side of our game. So you're hitting a player to identify an area of the game that they're weak at, right? And then want them to be specific about what you want them to achieve, what they want to achieve. For instance, it might be one of your defenders who consistently gives away frees. You might be looking at his tackling techniques. You might look in training games, the number of frees that he gives away, that it decreases, have a particular focus on it. So be specific. It might be scoring frees, it might be tackles, it might be passes, but be specific about what you want them to achieve, what they want to achieve. Get your players to be accountable. If you leave it to the player to be accountable to themselves, many times they'll take the easy way out. But if you make them accountable to somebody else, it might be one of the team leaders, one of the senior players who's a team leader. It might be a captain. It might be one of the management team. It might even be the manager himself, that he will be accountable to as well as himself. But it's also important that what they're choosing to work on will actually deal with the problem. It's not taking a different route or different direction, but we don't end up dealing with the problem that we have. And then the last bit is about guarding your thoughts. Because when something is difficult for us, come back to that word challenges. When we're faced with a challenge, we can take the hard way and stick at it to try and improve, or we can take the difficult way. So be positive about the challenge you set yourself. Be positive. Keep the negative thoughts out. So that's one approach you can deal with your players. The second approach, so it's probably going to go the other way, is about building awareness. And so the approach is to make yourself aware of, why am I doing this? What has you playing Gaelic games? What drives you to play it? And that's within ourselves. We have the answer to those. how do you, as a person, a player, how do you deal with the challenges that they're faced in their own development in Gaelic games? And then what outside of your training, what outside of your games in your ordinary life will affect your performances? So you have to be aware of why I'm doing this. Second part then is finding your motivation. And that motivation might be...
Frank, just a wee second. Have you to have stuff on the screen there?
I'm going to fast forward, sorry.
You haven't approached the approach to up. That's it now.
Find the motivation. So that motivation might be within yourself. In terms of you're playing the game because you enjoy playing Gaelic games. You enjoy the comradeship, you enjoy the team environment. So that's what drives you to take part. Or your motivation might be outside. You might have ideas, you might have designs and dreams to make a development squad, to make an academy squad. Maybe they go on the club senior team, maybe they win senior championship in the club. It might be the play for the county at the various levels. It might stretch as far as winning Ulster inter-county championships for all Irelands. So that's the motivation that's outside of you, which drives you on. And having that sort of extrinsic motivation can be a help sometimes whenever the drive from within you might be low. You might not want to go to train tonight, and if you're just driving it for yourself, you might not go. But if the team is pushing on in the championship, you don't want the other players down, so that drives you out to win the championship. That gets you out the door to get the training, get the games. So build awareness, find the motivation, and then pay attention to what you're at. I liken this to money. You've only so much money, so you have to decide how do you spend it. You only have so much attention, so you must decide, where do I put my attention? Where? So people often talk about a player or a team loses focus. I don't believe we do lose focus. I believe our focus is probably on the wrong thing. So you're always focused on something, but it may not be what's relevant at that moment. So again, like the money, you have only so much. Where are you going to direct it? Okay. I want to move it on and just give a couple of examples from my own experience in terms of challenges that I faced. And it did centre around the mentally preparing the side. I took over, this is a Burn Senior football team. I took over in 2010. And I took over in 2010, Burn a very, very successful senior football club in Down. They've won Down Senior Championship, Ulster, and a number of All-Ireland club championships. But when I took over in 2010, they hadn't won a senior championship in 13 years. Now you can picture the dinner table, Burn and Down, small parish between you and one point, but a lot of very famous families, the Mullocks, McGoverns, the Rourks, very famous families, all steeped, all have won all these championships. So guess what was out for those players over those 13 years? Each time they came to the championship and they didn't win. Guess what was out around the dinner table? And it wasn't that they didn't have good players or good teams at that time. They did have, but they just couldn't manage the expectation. Again, it comes back to that word we had at the start about expectation. The players couldn't manage it. So what did they do? We had a group meeting with all the players and we worked in small groups. I posed a couple of questions, five questions in total. Two of them, the most important. Number one was, I asked them, had they reflected on the previous 3-4 years, not to blame previous management, but to reflect and ask themselves, had they achieved everything that they could and should have? And the second question follow-up to that was, if they didn't, feel they had achieved everything they could. Why? So what we have in this slide here is just a number of the responses from them. And you can see the type of things that they came back with. And it was about looking at, on the right-hand side, or sorry, on the left-hand side, arguing under pressure, decision-making on the pitch, our mentality, know how to go in the game, poor discipline, negative feedback from supporters. On the other side, no certainty. So you can see there, so the right-hand side are about team matters, tactically, team play, technically. But on the left-hand side in black are all things which were in their heads. What we then had to do as a management group, what our job was, what I tried to do, was to put things into practice on the training field and off the training field that dealt with each of these. I actually had, I called all these, always have called these, reasons for failure. Because players are very good at giving you reasons for failure. What I had to do was to remove those reasons for failure. So we worked at training in terms of arguing under pressure. We put, whatever players there may have been, a number of players this applied to, we put them under pressure in games. We challenged them, we made decisions. We really tested them. We penalised them if they reacted in a bad way under pressure. We looked at decision making on the pitch. And what we had to do with that, and that's where our games come in, where the players were constantly involved in games that had to make decisions. And the better they got at that, then the confidence grew. Our own mentality. What we did with that was we removed the expectation of championship. Not that we didn't want to win it, we did, but we focused on the process, one performance at a time. And that's how we worked on. And we tried to eliminate all of these things through our game plans, through our tactics, through confidence building, just to make them aware of the ability they had, but to manage the expectation of where they're at and manage it one game at a time. One of the things, I know different questions come in about reclaiming momentum. So the third period of a game is one of the things we worked on. What we did, we had certain game plans for certain periods of the game. I targeted 5 minutes before halftime, 5 minutes after halftime. We worked on the training. We had a midfield set play from the start of the second half that we won the ball, and there was a set play from that. That gained us possession and put us on the attack. We had go-to kickouts that we needed to go to if we hadn't won possession for a period of time. We had a set piece that we went to. We maybe put on a full court press on the opposition kickouts to put pressure and win the ball high up the field. These are the type of things that we do, and especially at critical parts of the game. Some people talk about the third quarter. So they're the type of things that we would do. Maybe another thing we did, we would double team an opposition defender once we won the ball to try and win it high up the field. So these are things that we would have looked at, and we worked at those solidly in training, week after week, night after night. And when the players saw these things working, their confidence grew. The expectations for themselves or what they expected from themselves grew. And their focus in terms of match upon match grew. And that's how we tried to manage that team. And on a week-by-week basis, by the time we got the championship, they didn't have a fear of championship. And we kept reflecting back. We would have talked about, if we're not going to win today, will it be because of our poor decision making? And the players would have said no, because our decision making is good. Negative feedback from supporters, no, we blocked that out because we just focus on the job at hand. Now, that was as a team. Let me look very quickly at a player. I had a player, cornerback, one of the best man markers I had, totally committed. but he was volatile, he was temperamental. He had difficulty. He prided himself in being a good defender, and he couldn't accept decisions when decisions went against him for referees. So black cards, yellow cards, red cards followed. This proved very costly for the team. So what did we do? We looked down, we tried to develop with him some coping strategies. For instance, there would have been somebody, if he were fired out of him, maybe one of the management team would have been close by in line with him and maybe started 3 breaths. So we had to take 3 deep breaths before we did anything. Or the captain was tasked to get, if the captain was in defence, well, he was tasked to get to him right away. As soon as the free was given, he was very close to him. Or he had a buzzword, which we recited to him, and he had to say that to himself, which got him to focus on what was happening from the free rather than the official or the decision or the opponent, or maybe starting them to the next ball, get ready for the next ball. So different things like that. It worked for a bit. We then tried him in different positions because it was important to us. We tried him in the half forward line, where his frees, if he given away, wouldn't have been as costly. But I have to be honest, this worked, all of these things worked to a certain extent, but didn't totally eradicate the problem to the extent where in crucial games or crucial parts of games, when it was tight, we couldn't trust them. So we may have subbed them, or we may not have started them in really crucial games, because the benefits of keeping 15 men on the field as against losing one for periods of time or the red card with himself, the team had to come first. So I have to say, in that situation, he may not have. One of the questions that came in previously was about trying to block out failure in key periods. Well, this is the type of thing I would have done with this player in terms of key periods of the game, getting them to refocus, buzzwords, game plan, role, what's your role, where should you be? So we had this all set out with him in a process that he understood and could adapt to. And I would do that with the players. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Brendan.
Okay, thanks, Frank. All right, just what I want to take you through here is just my personal experience of using areas I wanted to cover about mental toughness, and I was looking at using mental rehearsal and affirmations. Let me first explain what those two things are. Mental rehearsal is where you get the player to think through, usually the first 5 minutes of the game, how he's actually going to play that. You know, see the first ball, first kick, whatever, and getting to walk through that. So he's actually rehearsing it. And that is accompanied by breathing exercises and relaxation. One I've used came from the University of Stirling and worked very much on the basis of tensing the body up and then relaxing it, and to let the tension out of the body, and then get the player then start to focus on it. It takes 5 minutes. It's a matter of working a routine. The best way to do it is if a player can do this on their own. You can do it as a group, but the best way to do it is to get a script worked out. The player reads the script, say, onto his phone, puts on his headphones, and he can listen to that, you know, anytime. You know, even the night before a match, if he feels he's going to get wound up. It's a way of just getting into that first few minutes of the game. That's what I mean by the mental rehearsal. The affirmations are where you're getting the player to reaffirm how good a player they are. That is, to identify things which they're good at and take a bit of pride in themselves, write them down for themselves where they see them every day. And every day say to themselves, you know, I am very good at dispossession. I'm very good at taking frees or whatever it is. So, but they have to say it as if they do it, not if they're going to do it, because the mind says going means just you haven't arrived there. So you have to describe it in terms, I've actually done it. So that's what an affirmation is. So I did this with the players. So coming to my first case here, and this is where it worked well. I was with St. Maurice team in Dublin. They're now senior, and we had the 2 previous years. I got the semi-finals of the league and championship and lost them. what I was realizing was it wasn't a lack of ability, it wasn't a lack of fitness. The occasion got to them and they didn't perform their best. So I realized I had to do something here. So that's what I worked at. And it mattered then, and particularly it happened in the semi-final of the championship. And I put in there about, refocusing in a negative climate. And what happened was we were playing very well. And 5 minutes before halftime, we're leading by 5 points, and we conceded 2 goals. And it sort of shook the team, and some of the selectors panicked a bit, and it was all negative going into the dressing room. And I was aware that this was now going to guys were going to drop their head. So what I did was I pulled them back, and I says, we're going to go back through our mental rehearsal. That's what we used the 5 minutes, the last 5 minutes before we went out, and got them back to refocus what we had to do when we're going out for the first 5 minutes of the game. We went out, we weren't beaten. We knew as soon as they left the dressing room, they wouldn't be beaten. So it's about that helps them to refocus when things are going wrong. Somebody mentioned very early on about adversity. So you have to be able to cope with adversity. So that helped us to refocus. The other time I was involved with using mental rehearsal and affirmations was the Dublin Miners 2009, and they won the Leinster Championship. What was important about that was we're involved in 3 draws, and 2 of them were extra time ones. So having to win tight matches, that's where you really need to have the mental discipline, that players don't panic, and they just believed in themselves that it would come right. So that's where we could see the difference. That was making the difference for us. Remember, it's not going to solve all things. You still have to have the skills, and you've got to have the team play and all the rest, and the fitness. It's when that isn't working, that's when the mental piece then helps you over that line. The other time we did it was with Tyrone Miners in 2013. We went to the All-Ireland final, we lost to Mayo. But what we can say about that team was that they performed to the best they could. We'd lost the Ulster Championship and to Monaghan after leading by 8 points, and came back in the quarterfinals and beat Kerry in extra time. So that's what it's about bouncing back, as being mentally strong enough not to worry when things go wrong. Even in the Kerry game, we started not so well in the first 15 minutes. We settled down and we grafted. But again, keeping our heads and keeping our focus, that's what brings you through. So those are were positive experience of using it. Now, that said, we need to be aware there's a time and a place for all this, because in 2014, we had won the Ulster Minor League. We're following up after 2013. We thought we even had a better team, in terms of ability. And we went into the quarterfinal of the championship against Monaghan. And as you see, the score was 3-8 to 16 points. Now, what happened there was we had been doing mental rehearsal and getting guys to relax and focus. What I discovered in the dressing room that day, I realized their heads were all wrong. They were too cocky. They weren't focused. They thought it was a matter of waltzing out. We'd beaten Monaghan earlier. And I said, we need to change this. As I went out onto the field, I met Monaghan coming in. They were really charged up. I said, we have to change this. So I spoke to the manager, Mickey Donnelly, at the time, and we said, Mickey, we need to change this. What these guys are, they need to be made aware they're in a real battle here. This is not a time for mental rehearsal and relaxation. This is about getting really fired up or fire in the belly. Mickey said, well, we didn't want to change. That was the pattern we did. But we went with it. We went out, and within 7 minutes, we were 10 points down. And by half time, we were 11 points behind. We came in at half time, and Mickey gave the fire in the belly and then back out. As you see, we just lost it by a point, which proved we had the ability, but we lost the head. So that's where mental rehearsal was a wrong strategy. So you need to be able to read the mood, where they're at, if we're going to do that. Now, there's some people asking me questions about younger people and using this. I would say, for example, you're probably talking about the 16, 17-year-olds onwards, because what you're looking at is when a player becomes aware that his fitness and his skill is fine, but he's not performing on the day, he needs to get that level of awareness before he realizes that this might be an issue for him. I would be saying to you, you know, one thing you should do, all players anyway, but particularly younger players, 14, 15 over, start getting them to be setting clear goals for themselves and measuring against goals. Get them to ask them, what's the 2 or 3 things you need to do in the game? That becomes their focus. That's the 2 or 3 things they can keep their focus. So you give them things to focus on. I wouldn't be introducing mental rehearsal, but you could use affirmations. Get them to write down. Very important for them to take credit for what they're good at, and write down what they're good at and remind themselves of what they're good at. That's from an underage point of view. All right, I think that's me. I'm just going to pass that on over to Frank again.
Lovely. Thanks, Ben. What we want to do, coming towards the end now, is to maybe provide you with just a couple of what might be definitions of what this is all about. And the first, I mean, really, we probably should describe what we've talked about through the course of the last 55 minutes. There's one, the ability to do the job you train to do, regardless of what happens to you in training or competition. Having a psychological edge that enables you to cope consistently with the pressures and demands of sport during competitions, training, and life. And the last one, which I like, it's not about the setback, it's about the comeback. So it's all what we're looking at, and what this really comes about is having the strength within yourself to be able to carry out the skills of a game in different environments, under different pressures, different challenges, and being able to perform them as consistently as we can. So hopefully they're fairly straightforward. There's no surprises there in terms of what we have. So what I want to do maybe is just summarise just the evening of what we've looked at. And it's a case of whatever we do in this, we want to affect positive change. So everything you do, you practice the skills of the game so that the players can perform the technique, but they can perform it in game situations tactically, and as a result make their team play better. But all of that won't happen if we don't have a positive mindset. So everything you want to do is to affect that positive change. So what we'll be putting forward to is, these are a number of key things. The 3 key words we've already started, and we can right through the presentations about challenges that the players face and how they meet them, about expectations and focus. It's very, very important that you get to know your players. Not just as footballers, camoes, hurlers, but as people. Get to know them. Get to know their personality. Get to know how do they react best to challenges. Do they accept them? Do they shrink away from them? Are they couldn't care less? Get to know how they best react to that. How do they react to criticism? We often hear about the arm around the shoulder or the kick up the backside. Which best suits and when? How best do they react to risk? Because when you are faced with challenges, at times you want to instill in your players an acceptance and a looking forward to the risk involved in trying different things. You also want to know how do they react to praise and positivity. And we all may think, oh, everybody reacts positively to that. Well, I know in my coaching time, I've had teams that I've praised after performances and say they were brilliant, absolute class, everything we wanted. Come out the next game and it was flat. And that was maybe because they thought, through the praise, with the job done, we've achieved everything, we don't have to bring that intensity or try as hard. So sometimes praise can have as bad effect as criticism. It's managing that, when to do it, when to recognise it. It will also be very important to find out how much do your players trust you and your methods. Because I know, go back to that point in 2010, when we started out, they bought into what we put forward. They trusted me, I trusted them, but they trusted what I was trying to deliver. And when you have a group of players on your side like that, you can achieve a huge amount. Likewise, if the players don't trust you or don't trust your methods, it can be very, very difficult. The final thing I would say, the very last point, that number 6 point, it relates to a question that came in about how do you get a group of players, a team, who've been used to winning, to continue trying to win. One of the things I would say about this is you must always have an edge. You always must have a challenge for you and your team. In that one team in 2010, we won League and Championship first year, League and Championship second year. And you would say, that's pretty successful, and it is pretty successful. So how do we keep coming back? Simply because one of our challenges, we wanted to win an Ulster Club Championship, and that drove them on. Because we couldn't win an Ulster Club Championship if we didn't win a Down Championship, and we wouldn't win a Down Senior Championship if we didn't win our first round match. So there was always an edge. There was always a challenge, and that's why I would say the team that are successful have that challenge, have that edge, have targets set, get the team to agree. What's our focus? What's our targets? Keep changing the squad, developing the squad, bringing in younger players. Keep rotating players and positions so there's no complacency. So that everybody knows I'm part of this, but I have to fight to play my part. So that's just in summary. I hope that you've been able to get something out of it. There may be some other questions. We're going to hand back to Tony.
Thank you, Frank and Brenton. There has been a number of questions come in when coaches was registering for the session tonight. So I'm just want to take a few here for yourself and Brenton to answer. First, I'm going to start with you, Brenton. First of all, how to deal with a 12 to 15-year-old footballer who pulls out of a 50-50 ball?
Yeah, again, this always comes back, coaching is about taking the player's side on a one-to-one and having a coaching discussion with them. So they not be aware that this is a problem. They're not be aware that they're pulling out of the tackle. They're not going fully into it. So always work from a self-awareness. Ask them the question. Again, this is where you use video or whatever, but get the player to discover for themselves that this is an issue. If not, you may have to tell them, but try and drop hints so they discover that for themselves. But ask him what he feels like when he's going into a 50-50 ball. Because what you might discover there is there's a fear. He's a fear, maybe he's a fear of getting hurt, or maybe he's a fear of not being successful. His mind is telling him. So you need to find out what's going on in his head or what his fears are at that moment. So the other thing too is often for players, you'll see that they can do it, but they don't repeat it. So maybe you've seen him do it, or you ask him, when have you done it? And you say, I felt good about that. I really got in there and I know how to do it. Okay, let's go back and talk through that, trying to get him to remember what he did that made it work. So that helps for he can reinforce that. So again, put this into practice, when you're in your training. And again, avoid just giving direct feedback. Keep asking, how did that work? How could you think you could have done that better? But also, once he does it well, make sure you recognize it.
Great, Brenton. Frank, one for you here. Why do teams who score a goal usually get the next score straight away?
I would have to agree with that. It's not more infuriating. And I think what normally happens is, especially if you can see the goal, because that's the place. So if you can see the goal, number one, your goalkeeper is going to be annoyed, not clearly. Maybe the defender, who was the last and maybe contributed to the goal being scored, keeper rushes the kick out because his temper's up. And either number two thing, it goes short and it's not a successful kick out, or he tries to blast the ball in temper and the ball is long. Or my favourite, from the kick out, the ball goes over the sideline. And it's all because we've lost focus. I have a saying which I instill in my goalkeeper and my defenders. And the saying is, don't turn one mistake, which is a score, into two. And one of the ways which I do to counteract that, they have to remember that would be started either by somebody from management or one of the leaders in defence. But the other thing which we would do if we can see the goal is we go to a set kick out. Because what I want to guarantee is that we get possession.
Very, very good, Frank. We have a few questions coming in the chat box here, but we've still a few more here that I had set out from coaches Redstone, so we'll try to go through them fairly quickly here. Brenton, one for you here. What's the relation between mental toughness and mental health? What's the relation between mental toughness and mental health?
I think when we come to mental health, I mean, this is a more specialized area. However, what we should be aware of as coaches is that, particularly if you're working with younger players, you probably become aware, you know, the most thing you're going to have maybe is ADHD. So you have an attention deficit disorder, and you probably will be aware of that from the parents. So it's very important to talk to the parents as well. So just be aware of it. That's the first thing. Be aware that might be an issue. So I say it's often easier picked up at youth level because it'll come through, it'll be declared maybe that may be an issue for the player. What may happen is that players you don't know and meet them for the first time or go to another club, or maybe at adult level. So that's where you just be aware of that. But look, if you're going into in terms of dealing with it, then you should be looking for the experts more in that area. But the main thing I would say is just be aware that it can be an issue if a player has a problem about focus and attention, you know, and keeping concentration. Just maybe that's something just to be aware of.
Thank you, Brenton. Frank, does mental toughness decrease as stamina diminishes?
I wouldn't be a physiologist. I would just talk from my own experience of what I've seen. And it's one of the things I'd be conscious of when I'm coaching. When I see a player that's tired, and the signs might be he's lost a couple of balls in a row, he hasn't been out in front, or he's given a few passes away, or he's made a couple of runs and fatigue is set in. So I would be aware of that. Because what happens is that when tiredness sets in, is that the first thing to go is your mind, is your head, because tiredness is there, fatigue sets in. And once that sets in, then the decision making drops. And then you start, the focus is lost. And you start thinking, oh, I'm not fit enough. I can't get out here. I'm not going to beat this man in front. Or you start thinking, this team's too good for us. And it all comes from tiredness. And the focus goes. So I will always work very hard and making sure my teams were physically very fit and challenged that way. And able to last through all the pressures of a game to handle all of that. So in short, yes, I do agree that whenever your stamina goes, your fitness goes, your tiredness sets in, then your mind, the focus of your mind drops. It's not as clear, it's not as determined. So physical fitness is something which I would certainly need to keep up to a good level.
Thank you, Frank. Brenton, we'll go one more each here of the ones that will come in, and then maybe we'll get one or two in the chat box if we can.
Okay.
Brenton, do you think social media is having a greater negative or positive on mental toughness?
Well, you see, it depends if you're allowed to. The thing about social media, it's magnified. Whereas before, you may be one or two people. When you're doing your social media, you can be bombarded with a lot of negatives or a lot of positives. The same issue arises as where how the person can cope with it and what they believe about themselves. Because if they have a positive view of themselves, it doesn't matter what people say negative, they can dismiss that. But if they feel they're influenced by external or what we call extrinsic views, then they'll be shaped by those. What we have to do is try to develop the player to have self-belief and not have the opposite, which is self-doubt. If they've got self-belief, then that has less effect on them. It's just that social media can be nasty, and you can be bombarded, and you probably need to be maybe a lot tougher to cope with that. and ignore that. And that's why I would always go back to the affirmations. Players need to keep reminding themselves how good they are, because you will get negatives from all directions, including sidelines, of course.
Thank you, Brenton. Frank here. Any advice on coping with a bad start to a match?
A disaster. Yeah, if you find yourself in that situation, what I would do, and what I have done, is that I've looked, first of all, to find out what is the cause of it. And it may mean that we may look to need to change some positions on the field. If it's a start to a match, I would not reach from a subs bench. I would look to change positions first of all. I might look to change the tactics that would decide to start with. So I might need to change there. I personally, in the opening 5-10 minutes, would not think about making a sub, no matter how bad the start was. That's just me. After 10-15 minutes, possibly, but certainly not before that. So that might be something which you might have to look at. We would also have built in to our training and our games. If we come on, we have covered and practiced different scenarios. If we fell behind somewhere in the match, leaders will key focus to pull things together. We might look for a stoppage in the game to get a breather, and if there's not a natural one, we might try and manufacture one, but just to get messages on the pitch. We might look to go to a number of our set players, our go-to players, and really just to get refocused in terms of what's happening. That's a number of things that I would try and I would do.
Thank you. Right, I'm just going to take a couple from the chat box here. Where can you get specific things to do or drills that might improve your mental toughness? Any advice for that, Coach Tom?
I think this is something again you have to be creative yourself, because these really are needing to be tailor-made depending what the challenge is for the individual. So you need to think about, how can I replicate that? That's what you're really saying. How can I replicate that pressure in a training situation? And so in other words, it's not something you always can go to a textbook for. It's something you might have to design for yourself and say, how can I do that? Again, the other thing is, remember, the player has the best contribution. Ask him how he thinks he can do it, what would help them. Often we as coaches don't ask players their views, and they often of course have a better handle on it than anybody else anyway. So again, it's a bit tailor-made these, but I mean, you get suggestions, but they don't necessarily work because they have to be to suit the particular person and the particular situation.
Thank you, Brenton. Another one to you here, Brenton. Earlier, Brenton mentioned using centering to release tension before a match. Can he explain centering in that context? Yeah,
but this is when you make players aware that, first of all, when adrenaline runs, as I mentioned earlier, players will feel even nauseous. They'll feel tense. The first thing is to make them aware that's okay. That's just the adrenaline running. And once they get, even though it's uncomfortable, but if they get to the stage where they feel that it's a little bit overbearing, it's almost like a panic attack, that's when you would need to say, do a bit of deep breathing. Sometimes just before a throw and even the game, players get a bit jittery and they feel jittery themselves. That's a good time to take a deep breath, tense the body, then bend your knees and release it. Hold the breath for about 5 seconds and let it go. And it's a good thing to do anyway, even just to let the tension out of the body before the game. But that's what I mean by the centering.
Very good. One for you here, Frank. I'm just going to put this into you anyway. How do you, I don't want to let you have too handy. How do you deal with a greedy, needy player? Good skill and promise, but overdoes it and has a chip on the shoulder.
Probably one of the most important things for me with that player is to explain the roles that each player plays, and to explain both their individual role, but also the role within the unit. whether it's in your defensive end, the midfield end, or your attacking end. And it's to look so everybody is clear. This is what's expected in the different positions. Then looking at him, looking at, with video analysis, if he's very greedy and looking at using video analysis to show him in certain situations in the game, this is where you receive the ball. These are the options you had. This is the option you took. This is the length of time you spent on the ball. Remember, within the game plan, we're looking to move the ball quickly. Within 3 seconds, you've held on to it and time it. Show them the timer. The other thing was, it's not at times I would have done is say, well, if he is responding to the roles and the game plan within that, because there's room for individuals, but it'll almost be operated within the game plan. If he fails to do that, at times sitting out and watching someone carry out the plans and the roles that you want, sometimes it's a good cure.
Brilliant. Right, there's a couple here, Brenton, asking about, maybe we have touched on it, a lot of people thanking you very much for your presentation and all. A couple asking, any examples of mental rehearsals? What type of information do you use?
Maybe the simple answer to that is they can make contact with me. I'll send them on to them. That's the quickest way to answer that. But you can then use that as a template and make them up. But usually, what is first of all is getting players. It goes through a few phases. First is getting the player to remind themselves of the best game they've ever played and what that actually felt like. You're getting at what did it feel like to be playing well and performing well. The second phase is about then seeing the forced ball. Visualizing it, seeing the ball coming to them. Feeling the grip of the ball in their hand. Looking up. Feeling seeing their foot strike the ball. For example, goalkeepers might be different, so you might have to do a different sort of mantra to them. So it's a matter of working out what suits a particular team. I say I could send on people samples that you can Google them. You'll see them as well in terms of mental rehearsal. But again, you will probably find yourself designing your own.
Great stuff. And the last question tonight, it's I'm going to read you out the whole question here, and between the two, you can answer, because it's a question for both Brenton and Frank. When you were managing your teams, were you conscious of your body language to your players during matches? For example, when they did something wrong on the pitch, what was your response? Or looking back at the bench, thinking you do not have a good player to make a change in the pitch, was there something you were aware of during your coaching journey?
There was some which I would take very, very seriously. And it comes back to one of the lines in the summary slide about getting to know your players, not just as players, but as people. And remember what the reason why we're all there playing and enjoying our games, and the respect that has to be there, and the trust that has to be there. So I would always have been very conscious. The odd time I may have forgotten it, but the vast majority of the times as a coach or a manager on the sideline, I was always very, very careful about how I dealt with my players, both on the field and on the subs bench, and never ever do anything or say anything that disrespects them.
I just come in on that. You see, I think that's a key question, because first of all, we need to realise that 65% of communication is non-verbal. That's your body language. So what your body language does, it tells you the other person how you feel. So what you're saying to them, I'm panicking or I'm confident. So if you're not confident and you don't feel confident, you're going to show that to the players. That's why it's important for you as the manager to do your own planning and preparation, so that you're exuding confidence to them. Because you can't pretend, they'll pick up the vibes from you non-verbally. So the onus is on us to do our homework, be relaxed and focused, because that's the way you want your players.
Absolutely brilliant. And can I thank those two men tonight, Brendan and Frank, on a absolutely brilliant presentation. A very, very interesting subject, coaches. I'm sure you'd agree. And there's a lot of thanks coming in on the chat box for you two men. So I really appreciate you men for doing the session the night for us. Absolutely brilliant. So I say to the coaches, remember next week we have our next session setting up a nursery program, and as I say, get your coaches in your club who's working in that area to link into the session next Wednesday night. So thank you for everybody joining the session tonight, and happy coaching, and keep safe. Thank you.